Hi, this is Ali Arango of Little Guy CGI, and today I would like to show you how to animate a dragon run cycle in Blender 2.78C. So let's get started. Okay, if this is your first time in Blender, I recommend you go to File, User Preferences, click on Input, and then choose Select with left click. Blender's default select is with right click, and this may confuse you if you're coming from Adobe programs or other 3D programs. Okay, what you see in front of you is the result of a tutorial showing how to model a dragon. I'll put a link up here so you can get to that. You also see a rig that I showed how to make in another tutorial, so I'll put a link up there so you can get to that as well. Okay, typically when you come into Blender, you are in object mode. Currently, when you look here, you can see this says pose mode. Normally, this is where you would see Blender say object mode, edit mode, or like you can see now, pose mode. Pose mode is where you actually set up armature bones into poses and you animate. We are currently in Blender's default workspace, which you can see right here. Blender has a workspace to make animating characters like what you see right here easier, and what it has is a workspace called Animation. So what we're going to do is we're going to click here, and we can see all these different workspaces here. We're then going to left click on Animation. So here is our animation workspace here. Okay, when we come to this animation workspace, we have a dope sheet up here. We have an F-curve editor right here. We have our timeline right here. We can see our current mesh that we're working on, as well as our armature right here. We have another window here where we have a camera perspective view of our character. We have an outline view here, which we can see the different objects that are in the scene. And this, definitely makes it easier to work in. This box right here is basically the camera view right now. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm then going to hold control and the middle mouse button to zoom in. I'm now going to hold shift and the middle mouse button to pan. If we want to make a view in Blender bigger or smaller, when I say view, I mean this, like a works place in Blender, we can just hover right here. So I'm going to left click and drag to make this area here a little bit bigger for us to have a little bit more room to work in. Okay, I'm going to hover here and see how I have those that symbol that's like an arrow going up and an arrow going down. I'm just going to left click and drag. Most of our work is going to be done right here. When we look here, this will be the start of our animation. It says 1. This will be the end, which is 180. If we keep the settings how they are right now, we're currently on frame 91. This right here is our timeline indicator, and this is showing us that if you look here, this is 90. We're on frame 91. Okay, as far as setting up this animation, we want to click here to go back to frame 1 so we can see our timeline indicator is right here. When we look here, we can see also that we're on frame 1 as well. For the length of this animation, currently I'm going to set this to be 40 frames. So you can see right here, this says 40 because the timeline indicator is on the 40th frame. With my mouse hovered over this timeline, it's important in Blender where your mouse pointer is at, because this will affect your short key. So with my mouse over this timeline, what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the E key. When I press the E key went right to this timeline. So it basically, E end, it made the end be frame 40. Okay, if you're looking at the timeline, you're like, oh, that's pretty short. It doesn't need to be long because we're actually doing a run cycle. So basically what we're going to set up is an animation for the dragon that once this, gets to this end here, when it repeats, it will be a cycle. So if this plays, or as this plays, over and over again, the dragon will just keep repeating its cycle, which should make it look like it's running. So we're on frame 40 here. I'm going to click here to make sure we're on frame 1. So it starts frame 1. You can see we're on frame 1 right here. You can also look here and see the timeline indicator is on frame 1. When we look at our dragon, I'm going to hold control, the middle mouse button to zoom in. When we look at our dragon here, there are a couple of controls, main controls that we're going to use. And the main controls are right here. So when I click here, I'm going to press G. This moves the leg of the dragon. The same thing on the other side. When I click here, this moves the leg on this dragon's leg. Okay, when I click here, this is a pull target. So if I move this, this will move the dragon's elbow joint, if you will, back and forth there. For here, when I press G, this will move the knee back and forth there. When I click here, if I press G, this will move the dragon's head. And typically when you're in pose mode, typically you'll find that you either are most of the time pressing G to move something or R to move something. Is typically how things work. So if you press G, like whether you're working on this armature or another armature, if you press G and nothing happens, then try pressing R, because that tends to be how it goes. Sometimes there'll be controls set up where you can scale what. However, for this particular rig, it's going to be G and R. G to grab and then R to rotate. Okay, when I say armature, this right here is an armature bone. The entire collection of armature bones make up what is called a rig or an armature rig, and we're using this rig to control this mesh. If we want to have bones not get keyframes on them, one of the things we can do is select that bone and hide it. I'm going to press A to deselect right here. I'm then going to click here. This is our main bone. With this bone right here, if we move this bone, the entire dragon will move. We're not going to use this bone for this animation, so what we're going to do is press H to hide that bone. Okay, to get our basic dragon run, we only need about 4 poses, so we're going to do the first pose now. So what we're going to do is we are going to click here. We're going to hold shift. We're going to click here. We're going to push these bones forward. We don't want these arms to be totally locked, so I'm going to see that when I pulled there how the arms bent slightly. We want to lift these up. These being, our arms. Basically what's going on is we have IKs on here. IK stand for inverse kinematic. And what that means is when we move this bone here, all of the rest of the bones that are connected to this follow these bones here. See how the dragon's hands are down? We want to make them basically going like this, so they're pointing forward. Think Superman flying. We're going to press R to rotate on the x-axis like this. And this is one of our main poses here, so I don't want to have this locked right here. Okay, so we have that, set up as far as arms. We're going to click here. We're going to hold shift and then click here to select these back 2 bones. Okay, so now what we're going to do is take this manipulator. The manipulator is this multicolored thing you see right here. We'll pull up some. We'll pull back some more. Now we're going to press R to rotate on the x-axis like this. So it's kind of in a basic flying pose here. I'm going to click here. I'm going to press R to rotate on the x-axis. These are claw controls, and I'm doing that. You see that how that is? The claws are basically flexing open here. So I did that to this one claw here. So I'm going to click here to copy the pose that's on this one particular bone that's making these claws basically like bend back. And then with it copied by pushing that, I'm going to click here. Now, when I did that, this bone basically took on the pose that this bone had. So I copied the pose here, and then by clicking this button, I pasted this pose to the bone on the other side, which is useful, which is right there. Because we have such a few amount of poses, we can take a little time, put in like some extra detail as far as having these claws basically bend up. We can do the same thing here. If I click here, very hard to see. I'm going to hold control. See that right there? Here and here, these control the claws bend in here. So I'm going to press R rotate on the x-axis and see that. So we'll just have this bend some. Then we'll click copy here. So I'm copying this one bone is all I have selected. I clicked copy the pose here, right? This is copy the pose to the other side, basically, right? To the bone on the other side. So see how it's right here? It's, unflexed. So now when I click this, you can see that this basically copied this side, which is very cool. I'm then going to press A to deselect. Okay, I'm going to hold control and the middle mouse button to zoom back. So I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to press the N key to take away this panel here. I'm going to hold shift and the middle mouse button to pan back some. When you work to animate something, think of animation as just a series of poses, and that might seem obvious, and it is and it isn't. Sometimes you see animation that's finished format, and you're like, oh, hopefully whatever you're looking at looks cool, and if it looks cool, you kind of like see it as a whole. All it really is poses, setting up the pose. So we're currently still on our first pose. Some of the absolute beautiful animations that you see, my gosh, sometimes you'll see people in videos or wherever you see them working on a pose. They might work on that one pose for, I don't know, a decent amount of time. Sometimes you can set up a pose. You can have a pose set up in like seconds. I don't know, 10 to 20 seconds. Other times you might see somebody working on a pose. They might work on that thing for 18 to 25 minutes. So the reason why I'm saying that is just, like I had said earlier, this is really only going to be about 4 poses. So don't feel strange. I just, if you're absolutely brand new to animation, one of the things that I wondered was like, how long should you work on a pose? Like when I first got into it, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm doing a pose, there's a lot of poses. I guess it should be 5 seconds and I should be done. I didn't know. I don't remember hearing anybody at that time say like how long it should take. So it could be, depending on the pose, could be 5 seconds. It could be 25 minutes setting up the one pose. Anywhere in that range. If you're wondering, I would just say don't feel strange about that. From 5 seconds to 25 minutes. Anyway, okay. So we have the dragon in our like kind of like Superman pose here, right? I'm going to click here. When I click, actually, that's not what I want. I want this one right here. So what I'm going to do is hold the mouse button to rotate the view. I turn the view to this angle because from seeing it this way, it's easier for me to pull this out to the side like this. I'm now going to press R to rotate on the Y-axis. And again, from this angle, it's a little bit easier for me to see this wing tilting down somewhat. And I'm holding the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to click here. I'm going to press R to rotate on the X-axis like this just to open up that wing a little bit. And now that I did that little bit of work on this wing here, if you look here from this view, you can see this wing's out, this wing isn't. I'm going to hold shift, click here, right? So now I have this bone as well as this bone selected. So what I'm about to do is I'm going to copy the pose. And when I say pose, this current pose that's associated with these 2 bones, I'm going to copy this pose, and then I'm going to paste this pose to the reverse side, which is these 2 bones here, right? So with these 2 bones selected, I hit copy pose, right? So now this pose is basically copied into, you can think of Blender's clipboard, and now I'm about to hit here. Now when I click here, these 2 bones should jump to this position. So here we go. I left click, and now these two bones took on this position here. So that's very useful. That saves you a lot of time, just knowing that you can generally copy the pose of a bone on one side of a mesh and then paste it to the other. Now, just so you know, the reason why this works is because, for instance, when I click on this bone right here, see how this says wing.control.L, right? When I click here, this is wing.control.R. So Blender knows when I click here and say copy the pose, and then I click this button to reverse the pose, it knows that I want that on the opposite bone. The name is extremely important. So if you were working with a rig and you try to do what I'm showing you here about, copying and pasting the pose to the other side, if it doesn't work, check the names of the bones. If the names of the bones aren't named the same, as far as I know, with .L on the one side and then .R on the other side, most likely this won't work for you. Okay, so I'm going to press A to deselect. Okay, what I'm going to do now is hold Control as well as the middle mouse button to zoom back. I'm going to hold Shift and the middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm then going to hold Shift and middle mouse button to pan. Okay, one of the differences between a run and a walk is when something is running, typically it's in the air during its run, like completely in the air, just for, it might be a second, it might be a quarter of a second. When you are working with an armature, there is something called a rest pose, and that's typically the pose that your armature is in when you start off. We're going to use that rest pose to help us animate. Okay, so why is it important for you to know about the rest pose now? The reason why it's important for you to know about the rest pose right now is because we currently are not working with a floor underneath the dragon. However, because we have the rest pose, that gives us an idea of where the floor is at when we go to that rest pose. As far as the difference between running and walking, this is a pose where our dragon is actually in the air. We want our dragon to have an up and down motion as it runs. So currently we went from the rest pose right to, just the arms being out, the legs being back. So what that means is we need to take our dragon and then lift it up in the air some so that it has a little bit more height than just that starting rest pose. Okay, so what we're going to do now is press A to select all of our armature bones. We're going to press G and then Z. You can see that preview line going up as well as down in this. By pressing G and Z, we can only move either up or down. So we're going to move up some. I'm then going to left click to lock that in. You don't want to move up too much. Be careful about moving up too much. Just some, and then once you have that being your armature as well as your mesh moving up, now what we're going to do is press R to rotate on the x-axis, and then I'm going to left click to lock in that movement. What I did was I rotated back some, and I'm basically thinking of the dragon as kind of going like as it's running, like it kind of like tilts up, jumps, hits the ground, and it kind of like tilts down some as it hits the ground, and then it comes back up again. So it's kind of like bounding, if you can imagine, across. So with this pose set, with our rotation set and all that, what we're going to do is come down to here. Now, right now, you can see this says location, rotation, scale. I'm going to click X to get rid of that, because if you were, just starting to work on an armature rig, typically this would be empty right here. What you see right here is not something that we need to animate. It just makes things tend to be easier to, it makes it easier to animate. So what we're going to do is click right on the symbol of the keys. We're going to click right on them. And then when we click on them, we see all these options right here. We want to choose this location rotation option So we're going to left click. And what this means is with these bones selected, when we press I, Blender's going to put a keyframe for the location and the rotation whenever we have a bone selected and we press I. Okay, so with all of these bones selected and with this setup down here where it's automatically going to put a location as well as a rotation keyframe when we press I, we look here, we see this is our dope sheet, it's empty. We're about to press I. When we press I, you're going to see all this information fill up here. You're going to see all these dots come here. The information that's going to fill up here is going to be Blender listing all of the visible bones that are currently selected, and the dots here are going to be Blender showing us that the location, rotation is placed on all of the bones that are visible that we currently have selected. So I'm going to press I, and now you can see here's the list of bones, and then here are the actual keyframes right here. Okay, I told you to have this drag and run. It's going to be about 4 poses. So what we're going to do now is we're going to right click, drag this to frame 40. So there's timeline indicators on frame 40. When you look here, you can see we're on frame 40 as well. Okay, the main reason I moved this timeline indicator here was to be something that I could aim for. So see how this is right here, right? This is the timeline indicator that you see right here. So what I want to do is I'm going to click the top right here, right? All of these keyframes are currently yellow, which is showing us that they're currently selected. What I want to do with all of these keyframes selected is hold shift, and then while holding shift, press D. Now I didn't push anything after pressing shift D. What I'm going to do now is just move my mouse, and I move these keyframes right over, or right in the same position as the timeline indicator. And if you look right there, that timeline indicator is going right through the center of those duplicated keyframes. So now I'm going to left click to lock those keyframes into place. Okay, now I told you it's going to be 4 poses, but I didn't tell you that 2 of the poses were going to be from the same work that we did setting up the first pose, which is very cool. So now that we have that set up, what we're going to do is we're going to go right to the middle, which is frame 20. So we're on frame 20 here. You can see the timeline indicators on frame 20 there. And then we can see also right here, we're on frame 20. Okay, what I'm going to do now is press the N key to take away that properties panel. I'm going to hold Control as well as the middle mouse button to zoom in. I'm going to hold Shift and the middle mouse button to pan. Remember I told you about that rest position? With all of our bones currently selected, what we want to do is hold Alt and then press R. And then what that did was that reset the rotation on all of our bones. Now we're going to hold Alt and press G, and that reset the location on all of our bones. Okay, for this pose, the main thing we need to do is have these arms come back and these legs go forward. So what we're going to do is we have our pole targets here, right? We're going to click here, hold Shift, click here. We're going to push these forward, and then we're going to push these down. The reason why we're doing that is if we don't do this, you'll tend to see the elbow act kind of, not look right, okay? So with that done, we're going to click here, hold Shift, and then click here, and now we're going to pull this back. Like that. See how the elbows are locked? You really don't want that. So I'm going to hold Control as well as the middle mouse button to zoom in. I'm going to hold Shift and middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to hold Control and the middle mouse button to zoom in. I'm going to push up and bring this back. I'm trying to get that lock. There we go. I didn't want these arms to be totally locked. I want there to be some bend in them. Okay, my basic thinking now is I'm just trying to get these arms back a decent amount of distance, and I want the things to be set up so that the animation will go fairly well. I'm gonna pull back and then push up, back, then push up. Okay, so now with these two bones selected, now I'm going to hold shift and then click here. Okay, so with these bones selected, what we're going to do now is press R to rotate on the x-axis. I'm going to hold control as well as the middle mouse button to zoom back some. Now I'm going to click here. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate. I'm going to click here to select these two bones again. Okay, I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate. I'm going to, with those two armature bones selected, I'm going to push down and then push forward. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of looking at here to let me know where the ground is at. I'm going to press R to rotate on the x-axis. Like that. I'm trying to avoid that, you know, I don't want this being straight. I don't want it being locked is, I guess what you said. I don't want those bones to be locked here. If you're like, what bones are there? I have some bones hidden here just to make it easier, it being, you know, the armature as well as rig easier to work with. So now with the arms being back, for the most part straight but not locked, and now with this being bent down, this part of our rig for the most part is set up. So I'm going to press A to deselect. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to click here, hold shift, then click here, hold the middle mouse button, rotate. I'm going to push forward here like this now. I'll push forward even more. And with these two bones selected, I'm going to hold shift and then click here. Okay, so now I'm going to press R to rotate on the x-axis like this. I'm going to left click to lock that in. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate. I'm going to click here and then push this in like that. Click here, bring this in, just moving this away from, you know, the arms right there. Holding control of the middle mouse button to zoom back. Okay, I'm going to click the tail here. I'm going to press R to rotate on the x-axis to bend the tail so it's going up. I'm then going to press A to deselect. Okay, I'm going to grab here. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to press R to rotate on the x-axis like this. I'm going to left click to lock that rotation in. I'm then going to push forward like this. I'm just holding the middle mouse button to take a look. Okay, I think I'm going to give some movement to the wings. I'm just going to, I meant to click here. I'm going to click here, left click there, left click there. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate. Then I'm going to take the manipulator and just move the wings back. Some like that. And I think I'm good for this pose. So this is our pose. It's going to go on frame 20. So I'm going to press A to deselect those bones. I'm going to press A to select all of the bones. Then I'm going to press I. So when I pressed I, now you can see right here all of these keyframes that are now on frame 20. And, you know, these keyframes are letting us know that for all of the visible bones, Blender put a location keyframe as well as a rotation keyframe for all of these visible bones here. Okay, we are almost, you know, through all of our poses. We only need 4 To have a basic drag and run cycle, we have 3 down. We only need 1 more. If we go through this and something doesn't look quite right, we only have 4 poses, so we can go back and change those poses fairly easily. So hopefully it'll go well. If we need changes, it's only 4 poses. I think it looks good so far as just the poses, but we have to see it move. So anyway, basically what's going on, we have the first pose we did, which is arms and legs outstretched here. That same pose is right here, and then right directly in the center we have this pose right here. So what do we want to do now? We want to look at this pose as well as the current pose that we're on. We want to put a pose right in the center of here. So what we're going to do is right click and go to frame 10. And you can see we're on frame 10 here. You can see we're also on frame 10 here. Okay, when we set up the rest pose, we don't have to set up the rest pose for all of our bones. We can select certain bones and make them go to the rest pose. So see these bones connected to the arms. We're going to press A to deselect. Then we're going to press C for paint select. So we're going to select these bones just by left clicking and dragging over them. I'm then going to right click to get out of paint select. And with these bones selected here, what I'm going to do is hold Alt as well as G to make those bones reset the location. Then I'm still holding Alt. I'm now going to press R to reset the rotation on those bones as well. I'm now going to press A to deselect. Okay, for this pose, a lot of times the way I think of it, it's almost like the dragon here is in a push-up position. Here we want the legs to go forward, so I'm going to hold Shift, select these 2 bones. I'm going to push forward some like this. I'm going to press R to rotate on the X-axis like this. I'm then going to press A to deselect. Okay, I'm going to grab right here. I'm going to press R to rotate on the X-axis. See, I want to move this up some. However, I want these to follow, so I'm going to hold Shift, then click here. When I say these, this is what I meant. So with these bones here selected and that bone, I'm going to let go of Shift. I'm going to press R to rotate on the X-axis. Like that. I'm going to click here, hold Shift, and click here. Push that forward some like that. I'm then going to press A to deselect. Okay, I'm going to press A to select all of our armature bones. I'm then going to press I to put a location keyframe on all of those armature bones. And then when you look here, you can see there's all those keyframes on frame 10. Okay, so here we go. Let's see how this looks. I'm going to press A to deselect. And we'll go to frame 40. We'll scrub the timeline. Okay, so it looks fine scrubbing it. When you move the timeline, you call it scrubbing. Let's hit play. Actually, before hitting play, one of the things you want to do, I'm going to click A to select all of our armature bones. Typically, what you want to do when you're doing a run cycle, see how we have our last frame here being frame 40. Typically, what you want to do is go like this. So now I'm on frame 39. This is also, you can see here that we're on frame 39 as well as here. Actually, as well as here. And the reason why you want to do that is so that basically what happens is when you come to the end of the cycle, this frame here is the same as this frame here. So basically, the animation doesn't go to this frame. It literally starts right there. The reason why you need this keyframe, if you're like, well, if you're not going to have this in the animation, then why even have it here in the first place. Let me make sure you know what I mean. I'm going to press E. So now this keyframe is outside of our animation. The animation is only in a gray area. So this keyframe is outside of the animation, right? So you might sit there and say, well, why even have this keyframe if we're going to just go to here? And it's because what Blender's going to do is it's going to interpolate from here to here, even though this is outside. But what it's going to do is instead of, going here and showing this keyframe, it's going to show that one right there. So let's click here to go back to the first frame. Okay, so now we'll click play. Okay, I'm going to press A to deselect our armature bones. The speed that you see here of this motion, we can speed up fairly easily because this looks fairly slow. I'm going to click here to pause this animation. I'm going to hover here. I'm going to press A and then A to select all of our keyframes. I'm going to click here, right? Actually, let me press A here to select all of our bones. So here's all of our keyframes, right? We have a fairly slow motion. Let's suppose we want to have this go twice as fast. With our timeline indicator here in the front of our timeline, what we can do is with our mouse hovered here, we can press S to scale, 0.5, and then press enter. Now what that did was that made this scale to 50% of its size. So now when we go here, our last keyframe is showing as 21. So we'll take it one before that. We'll press E. Now when we go back to the beginning of our timeline, we have a faster animation. Okay, I'm going to press A to deselect. Sometimes Blender tends to run a little bit slower when the armature bones are selected. Still running a little slow. We can see our frames per second when this is playing here. So it's not actually showing the actual frames per second. So what we can do is click on the dragon, click here. These are our modifiers. We're on our subdivision surface modifier is currently turned on. We have a view of 1, which is good. Another thing we can do is we can click here and then go to solid view. So Blender doesn't have to worry or be concerned about showing our normals and all that stuff. So we'll click play. Now I'll press A to deselect, and now we can see a more. We're actually getting almost 24 frames a second here. Okay, let me click play again. Okay, so we have our basic dragon run animation. I'm going to click here and go back to the material view. I'm then going to press N. Looking at our properties panel, I'm going to click only render. Okay, you can add to this. You can make it smoother. However, these 4 poses will allow you to set up the dragon run. You'll have your basic start to this. So hopefully this helps you out. There's a lot of things that can be done with this. You can make this into an action to combine it with other actions. I'm just holding the middle mouse button, taking a look at it. Okay guys, that's it for the tutorial. For all of those of you out there who like the videos on this channel and reshare them, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And to those of you who are new to this channel, if you like the videos on this channel and you would like to see more, please subscribe, and thank you for viewing.